So as you all know, I am a huge fan of mansplaining. Just tremendously fun, owns the libs, fantastic stuff, you know? So let's criticize some women's opinions on feminism. That'd be fun, right? If you're new to my channel or not familiar enough with me to know this is at least partially ironic, then stick around for at least a few minutes, okay? I swear to God, it's gonna get better from here. Or worse, depending on how misogynistic you actually are. Anyway, this went viral a little while ago. And, oh, hello, Merrick, the subject of this segment, kind of. We'll get to you. So here's a lady, I assume, not assuming pronouns, but maybe, might be a lady, I don't know. Men crying about how patriarchy they've created doesn't allow them to be emotional or vulnerable. And we have kind of a sarcastic look here. That's what I'm reading into this. 127.7 thousand likes, by the way. That's a lot. That's a big number, you know? And now I'm no expert on feminism. I think this is a really shallow reading of like simple feminist theory. The issue with this fundamentally, and I see this a lot, especially from young female feminists, is a tendency to reduce the complexities of the patriarchy and of sexism down to a very binary us versus them dichotomy where men are the villains who create the negative systems and women are the victims who suffer as a result of those systems. The problem is, like, not only is this not true, like objectively not true, it's also indicative of not being familiar with, like, about a century of feminist reading. Seriously, you can go back a really long way. I mean, even before the formation of what we currently call feminism, you know? Even when we go back before that, you can find female authors whose understanding of this issue usually extends a little bit beyond, like, men do the bad and women suffer the bad, you know? It's usually a little bit more interplay there. Now, to be fully charitable, it's possible that this person knows a lot of what I'm saying, and that they're just critiquing a very particular type of man here. The type of guy who whines constantly about all the ways in which men suffer, but don't recognize them as a product of the patriarchy. And those types of dudes are super annoying, but the text framed here really doesn't give that impression. That's not how this is phrased. Anyway, it's a really reductive way of analyzing this, because in reality, all of the social structures that contribute to women's suppression or certain types of, men's expectations, they're fed into by everyone. The idea that women don't reaffirm the patriarchy is kind of dumb. Like, you guys know that, right? Like, the idea that women don't also play into and reinforce gendered stereotypes that lead to a reaffirmation of these ideas is pretty dumb. There are tons of ways in which they do. Women are shitty to men who cry. Women do value toxic elements of men's personalities and deify them as, like, desirable aspects of masculinity. Women do police each other and adhere to, internalized and externalized standards for bodies and appearances and shame others for not adhering to that. Everyone does this. By simplifying it as, like, men create... How does one man create a patriarchy, exactly? We're all participants in a system we were born into, and that system is very, very, very old. You can make the argument that men are more responsible for upholding the institutions that reaffirm many of the elements of the patriarchy, and I would agree with that. But that has more to do with systemic critique than individual men, who I would argue are as much victims of the patriarchy as women are in many, many ways. Anyway, I wouldn't just be complaining about the one TikTok. There was another thing that happened, a very funny thing. So, Merrick, known to many of you as one of those rare people on Twitter who's always right and always gets dumped on for being correct, said, if you as a woman or femme person genuinely want to combat patriarchy, one of the easiest things you can do is make it safe for the men in your life to be vulnerable with you. Damn! Coming out hot with the cold take. It is shocking the amount of women who not only think less of men who are willing to cry in front of them, men who are willing to express uncertainty or fear, but are also comfortable enough in being contemptuous of this. They'll straight up talk about it like it's a good thing. Not to mention, it's apparently normal for women to shame men for being bisexual or attracted to trans people. Even from a purely practical standpoint, it doesn't even make sense. You're contributing to your own oppression by upholding rigid standards of how different genders should act. There's nothing wrong with any of these except for the number of quote tweets, and you'll never guess what the quote tweets look like. I'm not going to scroll through a million bajillion of them, especially since the counter jerk is starting to come into action here, but whoo boy, there is a lot in here. And a lot. How does this combat structural patriarchy? Quickly, it doesn't at all. Coddling men doesn't combat patriarchy. I really like this one. The idea that listening to men's feelings is coddling them is actually a direct reinforcement of the elements of patriarchy that Merrick is referring to here. Merrick never said coddling or even talked about enabling or permitting bad behavior. Merrick only said be open to vulnerability from men, which is what you should do with friends in general, you know? Anyway, it goes on like this for a while. I mean, over 1,000 quote tweets. Of course, if I scroll through them, I'm just going to see people who agree with me because that's how these things sort of work. I guess we adopt the views and morals of our oppressors, but we shouldn't. I think that agrees with me. Oh yeah, you clipped some of these, didn't you, Merrick? Some of the worst ones? Yes, please. I'm done being a feminist. Shut the fuck up, bitch. Give him a hug every day so he'll never rape you or kill you in front of your children, dumbass bitch. This person might be reading a little more into Merrick's tweet than Merrick put in there. They might be, yeah, we might be projecting some feelings onto this. Let's move on. I like to make an unsafe environment for men in my life so that they know if they fuck up, they'll be met with punishment. Let's end the patriarchy by pandering to men. You bitches are so dumb, and this is why we will never be free. I like the dichotomy here. I can be a feminist and call women bitches, but they can't. They're not allowed to. I'll put you in a giant centrifuge and spin you at 150,000 RPM rotational speed, rotations per minute rotational speed, until your brain liquefies. It's creative, at least. Actually, the easiest way is just kill all men. This person's a child. I wouldn't be too, You're such a punchable person. I can feel it through the screen. Literally, what the fuck are you talking about? It's actually not true. If you ever try to strike Merrick with a blow, her enormous tits will simply bounce the blow off, you know, sort of like a kinetic shield that prevents all physical harm. Which is convenient. Hand them a noose like I do, Hart. These are the violent ones. I don't think these are representative necessarily of the entire blowback, because most of it isn't like the violence. Most of it is feminists, or at least people who are nominally feminists, offended at the idea that being nice to men is a component of is a component of addressing patriarchy. And this really feeds into that pattern that I was talking about, that there are a lot of people who are just, their feminism does not involve equality between men and women. It involves a war against men from women. What would you call these people? Rad femmes? Lib femmes? I don't know. They're not intersectional, that's for sure. So I don't even know if liberal feminism is necessarily descriptive. Patriarchy exists because women aren't nice enough to men. Meh. Another day, another tweet absolving men of blame for the patriarchy and blaming women for our own oppression. It's crazy how much they read into this, right? Merrick doesn't say anything about blaming women for their oppression or absolving men of blame. There's no blame here. In the tweets that Merrick tweeted, there's nothing about men misbehaving. Literally nothing. Nothing that she said even insinuates the existence of misbehavior on the part of men, but they keep reading into it, don't they? Kind of weird. If women being nice to men actually combated patriarchy, patriarchy wouldn't fucking exist right now, Lamau. And if you genuinely believe that a major cause of patriarchy is women being too mean to men, ooh woo, you're not only a fucking idiot, but also a victim blamer. Congrats. So again, notice how this person interprets the opposite, allowing men to be emotionally vulnerable with you, as being too mean to men, ooh woo. You see? I don't think these people really think of men as people, to be honest. I think that in many ways, these, well, what are we going to call them? Rad femmes? These are probably TERFs, by the way. I think that these types of feminists really do think of men as a kind of broader political block of enemies that they tolerate in their day-to-day life and have to fight against politically. The problem there is that not only is this woefully ineffective, it's also kind of antithetical to the broader project of women's liberation. See, in case you don't know my opinions on all this, I imagine most of you do, but a lot of the things that women suffer from, men suffer from in a reciprocal, almost opposite way. The expectation that women should be like mothers and child rearers and home taker carers of is also the assumption that men are bad at those things, which is one of the reasons why men are assumed to be bad parents, or that it's considered creepy for like a guy to be at a park with like his daughter. Like people will call the police on that sometimes. They actually don't think it's a father and a daughter. They think it's some like creepo stalker, which is a really weird assumption to make if they're just doing parent-child stuff, you know? Likewise, it's the expectation for men to be breadwinners, you know? The expectation that women are weak is also the assumption that men are strong, which is something that men do suffer from. All of the elements that women of presentation women feel like obligated to adhere to get reflected back onto men as well. If women are expected to be dainty and weak and petite, men are shamed for not being strong and resolute and rigid and stern and domineering and controlling and etc., etc. And one of the biggest issues that you see with men is a lack of emotional vulnerability, leading to them being closed off. And emotionally closed off men tend out, they are often fucking psychopaths. They are unable to relate to women. They are destructive. They have poor outlets for their emotional problems. This isn't because men need to be coddled or whatever. It's because the ability to open up to people around you is literally like a necessary component of human social interaction, you know? This isn't like we need to coddle men more. It's that there's a way in which men are denying like a fundamental element of their humanity. And if you want to help them through that, here's a way that you can do it. And that does help because men who are comfortable with emotional vulnerability, and I don't have any stats on this, but I'm just going to guess this is the case, are probably a lot less toxic in other ways. Can we follow through with me on that one? Do I need a study? I feel like that's a reasonable thing to assume. Yeah, men get no compliments. That's one of the things, by the way, that I don't think a lot of women really understand. Men don't get complimented for their appearance unless they're very attractive, or unless they're a public figure, you know. If I wasn't a public figure, and I know this because I wasn't always a public figure, I wouldn't be complimented on my appearance. Because I am a public figure, I get people thirst posting about me all the time for some reason. But back before I was a public figure, even back when I was in my early 20s, when I was at my lightest and most fit, I really didn't get compliment on my appearance, ever. Not on my dress, not on anything about me, ever. And you know why? It's because I'm a guy. Guys just don't really get compliments unless they are exceptionally attractive or there's some social status differential that's leading to it. You know what I mean? Um, and that can really, 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 really suck. Yeah, what Xander Hall is saying is completely correct. A an unprompted compliment from a woman to a guy can be something they'll remember for years afterwards. Now, I'm going to guess that if you're a woman, I've never been a woman, I'm just guessing here based on my experiences with female friends and partners, you've probably been complimented a lot, and a lot of the compliments you've gotten were probably unwanted or like really creepy. I wish you could recognize that these are two sides of the same coin, you know? Sure, Verm, I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that. These are two sides of the same coin fundamentally. The reason why men don't get a lot of compliments is because compliments, especially about appearance, is associated with frivolity, which is considered feminine, and also because men aren't really considered the arbiters of beauty in the way that women are. That's always been historically contextual, by the way. If you go back to like Greek times, they considered the apex of male beauty to be like 14-year-old boys. Uh, the society and its mores will change with time. It usually seems to be the case that disempowered people, I mean, yeah, no, fuck them. It usually seems to be the case that disempowered people are stripped of a lot of power, but then they're assigned a kind of role in sexual beauty that's used to simultaneously elevate and then degrade them, if that makes any sense. And that's a pattern we should kind of not reinforce, if at all possible. I think a big part of that is normalizing the beauty of men or masculine people. Because right now, we've seen it's actually possible for men to get compliments and adorations of beauty in the same way women do. And how do you do that? By being feminine. What do you have to do to be a guy and get a bunch of compliments? Be a femboy. So we haven't really fixed the problem then. Maybe we've expanded the boundaries a little bit, but fundamentally, masculinity is still not really considered to be attractive in the same way femininity is. I think that leads to a disproportionate sort of allocation of compliments, which leads to unwanted attention in one direction and zero attention in the other direction. And the reason why that's also a problem is because, as Vermin so saliently pointed out just a few minutes ago, that means that in the rare times that guys do get compliments, or do get attention from women especially, they interpret it as a romantic or sexual thing because they're so starved of attention. They think the only reason a person would go forward with that is because they're indicating um, that they're attracted to you, or if they want to be a partner to you or something like that. And I know that's the case because that's how I felt in high school. When I was in high school, and anytime any woman paid attention to me, I thought, oh my God, it's a sign. And of course it wasn't. Well, I mean, a few times it was, but for the most part it wasn't. And that was just because the woman was treating me like a person. But so often I was used to just being ignored that even being treated with the casual kindness that I regarded everyone else with, or at least tried to, I wasn't perfect. It felt to me like a sort of attention or affect. But so many feminists only see one half of that interaction. They only see men interpreting every little bit of attention as affection, and they don't see the dearth of attention that causes that. You have to fix both ends of these problems if you want to address like the heart of the social problem here, you know? And this is the point that Merrick was getting at fundamentally, that if you want to address these in an interpersonal way, you have to put in effort to break down some of the stigmas that lead men to make the assumptions they do and adopt the personality traits they do. I mean, God, if you spend the first 25 years of your life getting essentially no attention or compliments from women, is it really that surprising you have difficulty relating to them? I mean, really think about that for a second. Is that surprising? That seems like such an obvious consequence of that, like, of those early, the early lack of attention. I mean, it's like one to one. I mean, I want to say, can we blame them? In reality, a lot of guys obviously act in terrible ways as a product of this sort of broader neglect. And I'm not defending that. I'm just saying, like, this is kind of the thing you'd expect to happen. So you got to fix that. You got to work on that. And you can't work on that unless you're willing to do things like be nice to guys, not do emotional labor for guys, not be a therapist for guys, just extend to men the same willingness to hear out vulnerability that a lot of women extend to other women. Because women do that for each other all the fucking time. When girls open up to each other, they're not like, oh my God, this is therapy. Oh my God, this is emotional labor. You're trauma dumping. Sometimes, I mean, that does happen. But for the most part, I think it's just expected in a lot of female friendships that they're emotionally open with each other. But often men are shamed for doing that, so they don't, and I don't know, then they go be a school shooter or something, uh, which isn't great. Unfortunately, as a product of this line of thought, a lot of people are going to think that it's like women are responsible for men's misbehavior, which I don't believe, and I think that's huge projection on other people's part. It's possible to talk about ways in which you can address a part of this issue without then leaping to the furthest possible point and going, well, all misbehavior is the product of women being terrible, which is kind of like the Stefan Molyneux argument. Stefan Molyneux was so far over on this point that he argued that all male misbehavior in the world is a product of poor mothers, that mothers marry assholes which produce asshole children. So if anything, you have to blame the mothers. Now, this is obviously a fucking insane perspective, which is why I don't believe it, and it's why Merrick doesn't believe it. But a lot of people projected it to Merrick, and I assume people have projected it to me as well whenever I talk about this kind of thing, because they don't want to own up to the idea that we all probably should put in a best effort to amend these problems. Anyone disagree with that? We all feel good about this information? We all feeling very woke right now? I'm feeling pretty woke myself. Did we enjoy the mansplaining? Yeah, yeah, exactly, Vermin. Yeah, for sure. That stuff was more normalized. Isn't there a risk women will be treated as psychotherapists if men will be encouraged to open up? Um, well, you have to be reasonable with those boundaries, but the thing is, I think there's actually a big difference between men dumping their emotional loads on women and men being open to women. I actually think those are different things because it is an issue sometimes that men will treat women like they're unpaid therapists. But when that happens, it's usually because the man doesn't open up under any other social circumstances, and they just find one person who they trust and they just let that all out there, you know? Whereas sort of holistically approaching men with the same expectation for emotional vulnerability that you would women, I think that would diffuse men's emotional weight more evenly, which is normal and healthy, and I think what a lot of women do, you know? So if we're it's about practicing greater social consciousness, you know? That's the thing we're trying to do, okay? We're making an effort. Yeah, of course, but I'm not defending that. I'm just how do you think we could go about complimenting guys while simultaneously making sure they don't take it as anything other than such? Look, there's no way to like as a single person fix a broader social trend. It's about normalizing things within your friend circles. Honest to God, like maybe not even compliments. Maybe you could just like talk. I mean, I'm speaking from biased perspective here because I'm a guy, but like a lot of women will legitimately just go out of their way to avoid any kind of friendly conversations with men. And if the men end up being weird about it, like I'm not saying continue it. Like you can stop talking to dudes if they're weird. I'm not saying like go to random bars, drink drinks that have been handed to you without you seeing how they were poured, and then just emotionally open up to every guy in your vicinity. I mean, obviously, we still have to be reasonable with this, but if you have close friends, it probably there are probably ways to handle this better than just complete emotional abstinence, you know? Yeah, 4.5 out of 5 cock bro, nice girth, heavy balls, good scrotal stretch, you know? Very good. Be reasonable about it, you know? Just figure out your own friend group. I'm just saying it's a thing that's worth thinking about at the very least.